Go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Virtual FantasyCon 2016. I am Amy DeClerc. I write as AR DeClerc, and I'm your host for today's web chat. And we are here with Lily DeCasey and with Sarah Berman, and we are talking about writing and the process of writing. And we have a little bit of a fun thing going on today. I have given the girls each 5 prompts from which they could choose to write a 6 to 10 sentence story based off of those prompts. It's going to give us a sneak peek into the way that these authors' minds work, and it's going to give us a little bit of a clue to the style and the type of work that they do. So I am happy to have everyone here today, and we'll just go around the room, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what kind of writing you do, and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Lily. I am the author of the Paranormal Detective series and other various short horror and erotica stories.
My name is Sarah Berman. I am putting out the first book of the Runespell series this September called Too Weird. I write urban fantasy, science fiction, erotica, children's books, pretty much anything I can get my hands on.
Perfect. And then we come back around to me. Like I said, my name is AR DeClerc. I am a multi-genre author also, but I write under the umbrella term of adventure romance. So my readers are going to find that every story I write, no matter what the actual genre, is always going to have an adventure aspect to it. My heroes and heroines are always going to get into a whole lot of trouble before we get to finally see their happy ever after. So we'll start with Lily, and we'll have her read out her prompt, her first prompt that she chose, and then tell us what you wrote.
The prompt that I chose was aboard a ship sailing to an unknown location. You discover everyone else on the ship has one thing in common with you. And you had really said 6 to 10 line, not 6 to 10 sentence.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. However much.
Okay, well, I'm sure, 'cause I'm one of those long-winded people. I made the full 10 lines.
Nope.
And here goes. The ship's log had no destination, but that didn't bother me. What did bother me was the lightning and thunder ahead of us. I didn't fancy dying. I murdered people in order to be immortal, after all. The other people on the ship didn't seem at all bothered. I wondered what I, a vampire on the run, was doing here with them. As I wondered, I saw the captain, a handsome man in a black cloak, approach me. He smiled and told me how glad he was to see me. I asked him about the coming storm. Well, Miss Bathory, that means we're close to everyone's final destination. Lovely, I said, and where might that be? He laughed. Why, it's hell, of course.
Oh, very good. Very interesting. I like the hook at the end. Everyone's going to hell. You slipped in a little Elizabeth Bathory there.
Yes.
Excellent.
That's my thing, vampires and murder.
Very cool.
Thank
Sarah,
you.
how about you?
Okay, I am going to do prompt number 4, and this is the making a decision as you're being crowned that can change the course of your reign. So, Your Majesty, you must decide on his fate. The Grand Minister pressed Lyanna despite her annoyed frown. Your cousin is your greatest threat to your rule. I know that, Lyanna snapped. If you kill him, mused the snide Duke of Crane, you will be seen as ruthless, perhaps without compassion. But, piped up the lovely Countess of Jubikai, if you let him live, some might see you as weak and incapable of making hard decisions. Lyanna pouted and slouched in the throne, her 9-year-old frame overwhelmed by the grandeur of her surroundings. Can I have cake for lunch?
Oh, very nice. So your main character is quite young and has had a mantle of responsibility thrust upon them. Now she has a major decision to make. I like how you created that entire scenario in just a few short lines. That was very good. I'll tell you guys, I had just as much fun writing these prompts, I think, because I was trying to think of something that would really you'd be able to, work off of. So that was fun. The prompt I chose, like Lily, was aboard a ship sailing toward an unknown location. You discover everyone else on board the ship has something in common with you. She is much like me. I see it in the way she moves, the way she stirs her tea. Counterclockwise, 3 stirs, then a quarter turn and 4 stirs the other way. She is staring out the window, watching the moon. I would have been looking at the moon too if I hadn't been staring at her so hard. She's another one, my companion said quietly. Another one like us. They're all like us, I tell him, looking around at the rest of the people in the dining car. Everyone is stirring their tea in the same way. Everyone's staring out the window at the moon. We are all me, or perhaps I am them. The man in the seat next to me is my twin in every way. Who did this, he asks. And we are horrified in exactly the same way, with identical expressions of disbelief and terror as we look around at this menagerie of people just like us. A terrible power to have, I murmur as the train begins to slow and comes to a full stop only a moment later. The whistle blows and we all stand, conditioned to move at the sound. Terrible indeed. So my characters have discovered that not only do they have one thing in common with everyone aboard this mysterious vessel, but they have everything in common with everyone aboard this mysterious vessel. So I found that prompt very interesting because it could go in so many different directions. We had a fantasy direction, we have could be sci-fi, could be steampunk, could be anything direction. So that was really fun. So I want to ask a question before we move on to the next prompt. Tell me, if each one of you don't mind, tell me about your process as a writer. When someone comes to you or gives you an idea, you hear a song on the radio, you see a movie on TV, a commercial, anything, whatever triggers your idea factory in your head, where do you go from there, from the moment that that first bit of idea was formed? How do you start your process as a writer?
Well, I never really had much of a process. It depends on what the story is. If it's a short story, I'll usually go straight through and plow through and pull an all-nighter. When it's a novel, whatever the scene is that comes to my mind, I'll write that initial scene, and then I'll go back and build the story around it. So I always write out of order. It makes the process go much faster for me. And much more interesting as well, because half the time I have no idea what my characters are going to do. And it's a lot of fun.
My biggest issue is getting a cohesive plot. So when I get an idea, it's usually a character or a very specific scene, or just like this little brief photograph of action, and then I go through and I think, okay, what is the most logical and dramatic thing that could happen for this thing, and then I build the plot, because otherwise I just wander around like I'm lost in the woods, and then I form the story around that. And I try to think of, I have a very logical mind, which is odd because fantasy science fiction, but it has to make sense first and foremost. But then after that, it's like, what is the weirdest, creepiest, or worst thing that could possibly happen in this situation that makes sense, and is it too corny?
Interesting. You're almost an outliner, like you have that backbone, you have the spine, and then you add to it, whereas Lily's the opposite. She's and I'm sort of in the middle, because usually something will trigger my idea factory. I say, oh, that would make a great story. But for me, it always starts with the characters. So I have a name or a face or, a general thought of this person who would be interesting to me. And I say, how is this person interesting to the rest of the world, to my reader? And so, for example, I was actually just talking with some friends on Facebook about this. I love Linkin Park, and so I was watching their video, and I said, oh, well, why did this happen? Why is this guy here? What's going on? And so I completely sat down and said, well, I'm going to tell this guy's story. And it became my science fiction novel, Bound to You. And so I posted a link to the video online, and one of my readers said, did you use this story as your inspiration, or is this just eerily coincidental? And I said, no. I saw this, and I had to know the whys and the particulars of this man's story. So that's kind of how my mind works. I always come up with the characters, and then I say, well, what happened to this character to bring them to this point where I thought them up, And I kind of think at that point, I'm like Lily. I don't know what's going to happen in my stories from one moment to the next. I don't have the end plotted out. I know my hero and my heroine are going to be together. I just don't know what roller coaster ride they're going to be on to actually make it there. So I'm sort of in between because I have an ending point that I know I want to get to. I'm just never really sure how I'm supposed to get there. So that's very interesting. It's strange how minds all work differently, but we all come to the same general point at the end, which is we have this cohesive story that readers want to read. And I think that's wonderful. That's what makes all of our stories different, and makes us individuals as artists. So let's move on. Let's go on to our next prompt. Lily, what was your next one?
The next one I picked was the news reports are saying a nuclear war is imminent, and you find yourself in a corner bar the night before the end of the world. Nuclear Armageddon was about to happen. All I wanted was to get a drink at the bar. I wound up sitting next to an insufferable chatty patron. You know the type. He wouldn't shut up even when I turned my back to him. I looked to the bartender for relief, and she walked by, commenting on the world's current situation. She asked us what we'd do if we were in charge of the weapons. The guy next to me went on a short monologue about how terrified he was and how everyone should live in peace, while all I said was I'd let it rip. I admit being slightly drunk and very frustrated did have a little to do with my blasé response. The next day, the nuclear missiles had been launched, and I received a package with a torn-out tongue and a note. Thanks for the advice. Here's a souvenir from your barmate last night.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of made my character wasn't in charge of the weapons, but yet she fired them off anyway.
Let it rip.
Exactly, let it rip.
Sarah, what about you?
For my second one, I picked prompt number 5, which is 5 innocuous objects are given to you on a train. And so I scowled at the pile in front of me. Some Asian jerk dropped this crap on the table and asked me to take care of it for him and took off before I could respond. What the heck? I picked through the pile. A little tin top, a 10-sided die, a weenie mobile whistle, a plastic ring with a soft spiky ball on top, and what looked like a thrift store brooch in the shape of a flamingo. The Asian jerk ran back into the dining car and fell, a knife protruding from his back. 2 more Asian guys came in and checked him before turning to Asian number 4. 4 glared down at the body. Find them. Without the toys of the Dalai Lama, the next will never be found. I scooped the toys into my purse and gaped at the body with the rest of the passengers.
Very interesting. I have a little bit of a golden child vibe going on in that story. I like that.
Yeah.
Person suddenly thrust into a situation that is going to get them into a lot of trouble, it sounds like. So that's very good. That was a hook. I could definitely continue reading that story to see what happened to the toys of the Dalai Lama. Very good. I kind of picked the prompt that I thought was the funniest. And so I chose, your character awakes to find that he or she has swapped bodies with their one-night stand. So here we go. How does one manage this? I look down at body parts that make no sense to me and try to figure out how to use them. My bladder empties finally, and I am left to decide how to handle these unfamiliar parts. Tell me again how all this happened. A blonde head appeared around the door to the bathroom. Blue eyes stared at me with wide-eyed wonder. My eyes, my blonde head, but that was not me inside my body. I don't know how it happened, I admit. I'm Faye, so I assume these things happen from time to time. We switched bodies for Oberon's sake. The man inside my body slams open the door. I've never seen myself naked through someone else's eyes. Not bad. How do we get back to ourselves? I'm sure we can figure it out, I soothe him. Until we figure it out, I'm stuck in your body. He glances down at my breasts and grins. Not that I mind too much, but I'd like to be back to myself as soon as possible. As if I'm ecstatic to be you, I told him, pointing to the flaccid organ between his legs. This is completely ungainly. How do you manage it? Practice makes perfect, he assured me with a wink. How is it that a man is a man, no matter what body he possesses? So there we have my 2 characters, and they have woken up in a very strange situation. Apparently, they're making the best of it, but there are some very good jokes to be made probably throughout that manuscript if I were to continue it. But yeah, I always enjoy a little humor in my stories. I try to make my characters sometimes have a good one-offer if they can. But I did want to ask another question while we were in between prompts. So, what type of stories do you most like to read? And do these stories influence the kind of stories that you write? So, let's say if you read mysteries, do you prefer writing mysteries or do you stay away from mysteries because you've read so many? That's the question that always comes to mind when I want to talk to authors about their process.
Well, I actually read everything. Anything I can get my hands on, even some nonfiction. I prefer horror and mystery, and that is what I write. As you can tell by the 2 prompts that I've read, I love the darkness. I love vampires. Anything with vampires that don't sparkle, I'll read. Sorry, I had to put that out there. I love Stephen King. I've read every book he's ever written. And one day I hope that I could have 1/10 of his talent. But yeah, I've always wanted to write horror and paranormal. And it's something I've been interested in from literally the time I was born. And you could ask my mother, it's true. And I do try and stay away from typical mysteries because, yes, I've read so many of them. They all seem so obvious to me, so I don't want to write them myself.
I'm a King fan myself, but and probably an atypical King fan in that I don't read his horror, but I absolutely love the Dark Tower series. And so I find myself torn between why can't he write more stuff like this and everyone else loving his horror. So I find that I'm envious of his talent as well because he's able to spin a tale that can span so many books and be so grand and pervasive and still manage to do it in a way that keeps readers coming back to him over and over again. And I do agree with you. He has a great talent for that. When the thing about mystery that I find too is I love mysteries, and my stories usually have a little mystery in them, is creating that twist that readers don't see coming. And like you said, it's difficult sometimes to get back to that once you've kind of read so many of them. How do you figure out for yourself the ways to keep your plots interesting? Do you think back on, well, I've read a story like this, I don't want to go in that direction. Well, I read a story like this, I don't want to go in that direction. Or do you just go naturally with the way the story takes you?
I just go. I write whatever I can. If I do during my edit process going into the second draft, if I find something that, oh, well, this seems too familiar to such and such, I will edit it out. But usually I just write whatever I can and hope that people would never think that I was copying. I mean, the entire plot of my paranormal detective series, there is another slightly similar paranormal series, even set in Chicago. And I had never heard of it writing mine. So the first thing I did when I wrote my query letter to my publisher is, this is my story. This came to my head. I had no idea such and such a book was out. And thankfully, people made the connection, but no one ever thought that I was copying. Because I never want to be thought of as unoriginal. The best writers are the ones who have their own voice and their own plot. So that's always what I make sure is that I'm me. And when you open that book, just like when you open a King book, you know who that author is. And that's what I always make sure I do before finishing my final draft.
Perfect. What about you, Sarah? Is that how you work it when you're editing? Do you go back and try to make sure your voice is strong as an author?
Well, oddly, because I do so much planning at the front end, I really don't have to do a lot of heavy editing when I'm done. I end up doing all of my thinking before I even start writing the work. I know what all of the big things are. Whether or not that actually works out in the story is a whole different thing. A lot of the times when I find an idea, I'll twist it. There's one that I very unashamedly stole from the Wheel of Time series, which is an epic fantasy. And I put it in a hard sci-fi book. And instead of being magically driven, it's science-based on how it actually interacts, but the basic idea is still there. So I take these things and I put them out of context and I give them a twist. And so the basic idea is still there, but I have very unashamedly, put the the Tumblr filters, or whatever, Snapchat filters. I don't know. I don't do those. But I changed the colors. I changed the situation. I Photoshop them into my stories, so they're still mine, but they're taken. And so that gives me the ability to take all of these beautiful ideas from all different kinds of sources and smush them together. And I probably go into the whys a lot more than the source material does, and so that gives me a different voice about it. And I tend to have extremely snarky characters who, like, my Too Weird is about somebody trying to stop the beginning of Ragnarok, which is the end of the world. It's an apocalyptic scenario. And so I literally have my main character going, "Are you kidding me? You're trying to get me to stop the end of the world. Is this a joke?" Because it's kind of a corny premise, and rather than, try and play it out as serious, I was like, no, she wouldn't do that. She'd be like, "This is ridiculous."
Very cool. I think voice is very important for writers. To have a clear concept of who you are as a writer and how you want to convey your message to your readers is the mark of a good writer, I think. And it's funny that you mentioned Ragnarok, because actually I tend to mash things up a little bit myself. So like when I wrote Providence, which is the second book in my Mythical Madness fantasy romance series, my husband is a Lovecraft fan, and he enjoys the idea of Cthulhu mythos. So I said, well, what if I could put a little bit of Cthulhu, a little bit of Lovecraft as an homage to my husband, into this story about gods and goddesses? And so I also brought in some literary characters. So I have the Count of Monte Cristo, I have Scarlett O'Hara, I have my two main characters, and then I have all of these, Lovecraftian gods, all happening in Asgard as Ragnarok is beginning. So I try to do a mashup almost of the things that I love and the things that I think will keep readers entertained, and always try to present those things, like you said, with my own voice, with my own spin on it, change the colors, make everything your own. And I think that that's, there are no ideas that haven't already been done in literature, and that's it's always just about how you tell the story and your voice and how it comes through in the story. And that's the mark of a good writer, I think. So tell me, how long on average, I know Lily said that, she can push through a short story in a night. How long on average does it take you to write a book and have you feel like it's publisher ready or self-publisher ready? How long do you, let's go novel length. We'll stay away from short stories and novellas, but we'll go novel length. How long do you think on average that takes you?
Between writing and publication, it takes 6 to 8 months. Writing usually takes 4 to 5 months, and then after that it's sending it to my publisher, getting the proper release date, getting the edits, getting the cover. But it really does depend. I wrote a 60,000 word book in 2 months, and then I wrote a 40,000 word book in 5 months. It does depend for me on the story, but it helps when by the time I got to the third book in my paranormal detective series, I knew where the story was going. So I was able to write it, even though it was 60,000 words, I was able to write it a little bit quicker. I actually just finished my longest novel to date, which is up to 84,000 words, and that's before edits. I just heard back from one of my betas about it right before the meeting started, actually. But yeah, writing doesn't take as long. It's usually the editing that takes the longest, because I'm a perfectionist, and every little word, every punctuation mark, it has to be perfect. The tense has to be perfect, everything. So I nitpick for quite a while.
Well, my hard science fiction took, let's see, what year is this? About 20 years. Too Weird took a month and a half. So yeah, Lily's completely correct. It really depends on what you're working on, how well it's flowing. I did Too Weird as NaNoWriMo, so I pushed through that pretty quickly. I had a lot of motivation to get it done. Yeah, it kind of depends, I personally think that with outlining and things helps me get the ideas out faster, and it actually allows me to jump around a little more without, like, I with my hard science fiction, I was reluctant to jump around because I wasn't sure what was going to work and what wasn't. And so I was a little bit hesitant about that. With Too Weird, I could just look at my outline and be like, well, I'm going to work on this scene today. I'm going to work on this scene today, So it helped me get over my particular insecurities on that one. So, yeah, I think that, you have authors like Stephen King can pump out, what is it, like 4 to 6 books a year? Guy's insane.
2 to 3 books, yeah.
Christine Feehan is another one that puts out, like, between 2 and 5 books a year, every year. It's crazy. But, once you get the
Sorry,
kind of
you froze on me.
I did?
Yeah, I think it's actually you that's frozen. There you go. That's the problem with being on mobile.
But you have a certain level of experience that helps you get the ideas out faster, and you gotta get that flow, and you get your voice and everything like that, and that helps a lot. So each book is going to be a little bit faster than it otherwise would have been if you hadn't had the experience of the books before.
I agree 100% with that. Actually, I'm beginning to ender. So I write, from the beginning to the end. Pretty much I don't skip around and I don't do scenes out of order. But I have found that once I'm into the flow of the story, I can usually maintain the voice, maintain the speed, the pacing that I want the words to have. But lately I kind of came across with one of my works in progress that I was doing, where I got to a point where I kind of felt stuck. And I was like, okay, I'll just let things percolate and sit for a while I worked on something else. And then I came back to it. So it's taking me by far the longest of anything else to write, but simply because I knew where I wanted to go. But my characters weren't communicating with me that well at the moment of how I was going to get there. So I did come back to that later and kind of do that. For right now, Lily, if you could pause the recording, I just need to plug up real fast, and then we'll go through a couple more questions, and I will edit this part out.